Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get into today's video. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Crossing the Line. We have a disturbing story from Sky News and a disgusting piece of legislation that the Albanese government is trying to push forward, and I think everyone needs to hear about it. Albanese government's draft misinformation laws denounced as the worst piece of legislation for free speech. Media outlet Justin Quill described the government's proposed crackdown on misinformation as the worst piece of legislation for free speech that he'd ever seen. Well, Sky News Australia host Andrew Bolt said it would have a chilling effect on a very important debates. The Albanese's government proposal to combat online misinformation has been attacked as a major threat of freedom of speech by Australia's prominent media lawmakers. The draft legislation released on Sunday would grant Australian Media Communications Authority the power to issue massive fines to social media companies that fail to adequately crack down on misinformation on their platforms. The draft legislation defines misinformation as information that is false, misleading, or deceptive, and reasonably likely to cause or contribute to serious harm. Now, that is a very goddamn vague statement coming from a piece of legislation like this. What is harm in these words? Like, if you're upset and you're offended, that is harm to this bill. That means if you say that there's only two genders, they can deem that as misinformation and misleading or false or deceptive or something because you forgot to list the 7,000 made-up genders. They can shut you down, and they can shut social media companies down, which is even scarier, with fines, and they'll be pressured into shutting you down for them. This is what the Biden administration has been doing with Twitter. This is what all the Twitter files was about. Australia had been doing it with Twitter as well. It is illegal for the government to censor your speech like that. In Australia is one of the only Western civilizations like England, Australia, America, those kind of places, that does not have any freedom of speech bill. We do not have any sort of freedom of speech. So they can shut us up. We have no legal right to freedom of speech in Australia. But I wouldn't say that any country needs a legal right. I'd say it's more of a, whether you believe in God, but a God-given right. As a human being, you're allowed to speak, you're allowed to think, you're allowed to say what you want to say. Honestly, even if it is a threat, I believe you still should be able to say it. I don't think that the government should have any word or any stake in what you were saying as a citizen. This legislation is one of the scariest things that has cropped up in the last 12 months, and I would not be surprised if it gets pushed through by the Albanese government. These people are after your freedoms, they are after your rights. They just do not want you to be able to say anything that goes against their vitriol, their propaganda. They don't want you to be able to speak out. They don't want you to be able to say anything that they do not like, because we saw how bad it was for them over the last few years with COVID and the misinformation that was surrounding that. And it wasn't people like us saying there was misinformation about COVID. It was the government promoting fake stats, fake statistics, fake deaths, fake promises. And it was them promoting misinformation. The word misinformation's only popped up in the last couple of years. And it was people like the government, people like Pfizer, people like mainstream media that were promoting all these lies. And now they're trying to stop us from talking about it. And this bill will do that if it gets pushed through. Speaking to Sky News Australia, Andrew Bolt on Thursday night, experienced media lawyer Justin Quill said the proposal was the biggest imposition on free speech that he has ever seen in a piece of legislation. I've long been an advocate for free speech. I've had concerns about legislation like Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, but I can tell you in my 27 years on this job, this is without a doubt the worst piece of legislation for free speech that I have ever seen, Mr. Quill said. If it was brought out on April 1st, we'd all say it was an April Fool's joke. It is that bad. Thompson Greer, the partner, said that all sorts of inconsistencies and questions about the legislation, citing the fact that there was no definition of serious harm despite it being the relevant trigger for an action of prohibition section. It is poorly drafted, it is poorly thought out, and is half-baked, the media lawyer said. Bolt explained that he was shocked reading through the proposal, pointing out that while the bill would target everything from blogs, podcasts, and people posting on Twitter, state and federal governments would be exempted. So basically, rules for you, not for me. They want to shut you down, shut you up, and stop you from talking about risks of fines for social media companies, fines for you, possible jail time, because if you don't pay off a fine, what happens? You go to jail. They're going to make themselves exempt from it, because if they put out information like they did over the last 2-3 years that is false or misleading or wrong or just a blatant lie, then they get away with it. It's like, no, we the government, we're allowed to lie to you. That's insanity. So governors can tell lies, spread misinformation that they call the truth, but you could be banned from challenging it, the Sky News host said. Social media platforms have already signed up a voluntary code for combating misinformation, developed in response to pressure from the Morrison government, but Labor's proposed goals go further, much further, giving the ACMA power to force social media companies to change how they deal with misinformation and disinformation. ACMA will be able to force digital platforms to adhere to industry-wide standard for the removal of harmful content, with failure to adhere for standards leading to fines up to 5% of the company's global turnover. In the case of Facebook, that's $8 billion. Bolt warned that the powers would lead media companies and internet platforms to get nervous about the threat of fines that could cost having to defend themselves, adding it would lead to excessive censorship. This is going to have a chilling effect on very important debates, he said. So the basic thing is, if they don't want to risk getting fined in Australia, because $8 billion for Facebook is a lot of money for anyone, but $8 billion for Facebook is still a lot of money for Facebook. If they got a fine for that, they would just pull Facebook from Australia. They wouldn't give it the option. There's why would we bother wasting for 30 million people on Facebook in Australia? We don't have a very big population. They would just pull it. They wouldn't bother giving us Facebook. Not that I'd really care anymore. But Twitter, YouTube, all these places, they'd just pull it. They just wouldn't give it to us, risking the fine. Or they would crack down on anything that gets deemed as misinformation or possible harming someone. So if you go out and say that there's 2 genders, there's not 6 million genders or something like that, then they'll just immediately take it down at the behest of the government. This is insane censorship that people really need to fucking listen to. You can't even debate them on this, because if this law and legislation was in place, we wouldn't be allowed to talk about it, because they'd be like, oh no, that's misinformation. No, you're not allowed to say that. So they just take it down. Asked what he thought of the biggest danger of the bill, Mr. Quill said it would be a lack of proper definition as what counts as misinformation and disinformation. The media lawyer also pointed out the approach to tackling misinformation was likely to have an opposite result as what is intended. Does the Attorney General really think, does the government really think that the best way to stop conspiracy theorists is to try to push them underground, Mr. Quill asked. If someone's throwing a silly conspiracy theory out and all of a sudden their tweets and their Facebook posts just disappear because the government has said that they've got to disappear, do you think that's going to make that person or anyone who they might be in contact with say, oh, that must have been untrue because the government has taken it down? It's hammer it, nail, head. Like, no, they're going to say the exact opposite. This is going to have the exact opposite effect the government intends, and it's crazy. Mr. Quill said a far better approach to what is allowed to prevail through the open contest of ideas. The things develop over time, things we thought were absolutely not true at one point, we now realise are true, or vice versa, Mr. Quill said. It's exactly like the last 3 years of a pandemic. You said that the vaccines did all these things that they didn't do. You said all these people were dying that we now know didn't die or weren't dying from that. It's absolute insanity. And how do people just think that they can pass this law, pass this legislation? You've got to allow people's understanding of beliefs and develop over time. We can't just sort of set it in stone with our views. We've got to let them develop. And part of the way we develop is these views, people putting forward views that are wrong, and then they debate it. Like if someone says something stupid on Facebook and they don't know what they're talking about, 100 people jump on top of them and belittle them and tell them that they're wrong. You think that person would be any better off if they just had no one reading it and they just got immediately taken down? No, they just have their conspiracy theory confirmed that the government's controlling their media. The experienced media lawyer cited the example of Sky News host Shari Marksman reporting about the COVID-19 originating from the Wuhan Institute of Virology to show how once scorned ideas can go on to be widely accepted. They were laughed at when they were saying that. Shari, the Daily Telegraph, were laughed at. The media on the ABC were literally laughing at them, Mr. Quill said. Now, as it turns out, we've seen in recent weeks, declassified documents from the US intelligence have shown that to be absolutely true. That is the power of the government shutting down people on social media. If someone comes out with a story, say a reporter comes out with a story, puts it up on Facebook, puts it up on Twitter, and then the government just goes, boop, we don't want that there. That's misinformation. We don't want you to talk about that thing. Get it shut down, get it taken down immediately. That person is censored and you have no freedom of speech anymore. This is insane that people are even thinking about this. It just goes to show you how bad the Albanese government and how bad the Australian government in general is. They want to censor freedom of speech online, which will censor freedom of speech on the street. If you cannot go and point out something and put it out there for the vast majority of the internet to debate and to have an idea about something, if you don't know what you're talking about, you will soon figure that out by putting it on social media. If you say something that is completely wrong, false, and or stupid on social media, you will be shouted down. Even if you say something correct and truthful, people will still do the same thing. This is how we form ideas. This is how we nut out what is good, what is a good idea and what is a bad idea, what is the truth and what is false, by debating it. And the government is trying to stop us from even having a voice online. You will be able to go to prison. If people are already doing it now. In the UK last year, I think over 2,000 people were arrested for saying something on social media that wasn't even a threat or anything like that. This is extremely, extremely important that we get this legislation thrown out. What do you guys think anyway? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys in another episode. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.